You're listening to the Greeks Gridiron, live with Ethan Haristodoulou.
What's going on, everyone, and welcome back to more of the Greeks Gridiron. I am Ethan Haristodoulou, and today, on this July 28th, 2022, as training camp continues to roll through and the excitement is in the air as we get set for the preseason, I am going through my divisional power rankings for the AFC West division, going from numbers 4 to number 1, ranking all 4 teams, talking about why I have them where I do, and who I think is sitting atop of the division as we roll into the regular season. So make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and most importantly, comment down below. How do you feel about this division? Who do you think is standing at the top right now? Who's sitting at the bottom, and everyone in between? And let's dive right into it, shall we? So starting at the number 4 spot here, and I had a really hard time putting this team at the number 4 position just because they made the playoffs last year, but there's been a little bit of turnover, and I have a doubt or two, and I hate to do it to you, my Raiders fans, but I'm starting with the Raiders at number 4. Listen, the draft class, probably my least favorite of the 4 teams here. I know obviously you spent some draft capital to bring in Davante Adams, so that ultimately affects what you were able to do in the draft. However, you also have a new head coach in Josh McDaniels. I don't really agree with the fact that Rich Bisaccia did not get an opportunity to just continue to be the head coach of this team. The fact that, he came in replacing John Gruden and made that team push all the way into the playoffs, that was a real head scratcher for me. And now Josh McDaniels is here, and while I know it's been roughly like 10 years since this happened, I still have the taste in my mouth of Josh McDaniels as the head coach of the Denver Broncos. Now, I know the idea is, it's been a long time since then, and he's learned a lot since then. It's a different time. He has Derek Carr now with Davante Adams and Darren Waller, and you think, okay, he's an offensive mastermind with what he's done in New England. But he was kind of considered something similar to that going into Denver as well. And while I don't think Denver had quite as talented a roster while Josh McDaniels was there as this Raiders team is on paper, I still need to see the proof in the pudding on this one here. I cannot get over how that first stint as head coach went for Josh McDaniels. We also have question marks at the running back position as well. Is Josh Jacobs going to be able to reemerge as the guy that, the Raiders thought he was when they initially brought him into the franchise? Or maybe is someone like Zamir White, the running back they drafted in the, I believe, 4th round there, is he somebody that maybe starts toting the rock a little bit more for the team and kind of, takes some snaps away from Josh Jacobs? I will say that the defensive side of the football will be fun to watch. Obviously, bringing in Chandler Jones was huge for the team. You also bring in defensive end Bilal Nichols from the Bears. Cornerback Anthony Avera, we'll see how he kind of fits into the fold as well. A few of the free agent signings that this team made here. But ultimately, I'm just not super sold on the team right now. With some of the turnover and fitting in some new pieces, Is there a possibility this team just gets better and goes from there? Yeah, sure. But in a hotly contested division where you have 3 teams coming back where they're essentially just kind of reloading and getting ready to go, the Raiders made the playoffs, yes, but they were an overtime game away from potentially even not making the playoffs to the Chargers. And I prefer the Broncos defense and what they had already before plugging in Russell Wilson over the Raiders right now and their defense. So with some new guys coming in, new head coach, I'm thinking maybe a slight step back before a real jump forward going afterwards. So this is kind of where I feel the Raiders lie. Coming in at the number 3 spot, and I will say that number 2 and number 3 was definitely a toss-up for me, a big toss-up as well. And honestly, even partly number 1, too, when I was really trying to break everything down, because there's been so much turnover with additions and losses and, teams trying to get better and close the gap in this division here. I did settle with the Los Angeles Chargers, though. I do like their draft class. Bringing in offensive lineman Zion Johnson should be huge for protecting Justin Herbert. I love to see that. Safety JT Woods and running back Isaiah Spiller are a couple other guys I really like from this draft class as well, along with the massive free agency that this team had. One of the big spenders in this year's free agency period, J.C. Jackson coming in here, defensive tackle Sebastian Joseph Day, Austin Johnson, the D-tackle, tight end Gerald Everett. I mean, they were plugging guys in all over the defense through free agency, and, they really had minimal losses on the defensive side of the football as well. Their most notable losses for the entire free agency period were linebacker Uchenna Nwosu, who was a pretty solid guy. I was kind kind of surprised they didn't try to, hand him some extra money to bring him in. But when you remember, okay, well, they did trade for Khalil Mack, starts to make a little bit more sense. Money had to go somewhere and some money had to walk out the door. And I guess Nwosu ended up being a guy that got lost in that. And then Justin Jones, the D tackle as well. Those are like the two biggest names, the most money that made in free agency, who ended up having to go here. I just think that you had a team that, again, was literally a few plays away from potentially making it into the playoffs. You add some massive additions to a defense that struggled a bit last year, and I'm really excited to see Khalil Mack paired up with Joey Bosa. I also love the aggressiveness of head coach Brandon Staley over there in LA. There is a lot to be excited about here. Offensive side of the football, too. I mean, a defensive side, adding J.C. Jackson, who's a ball hawk, and, Khalil Mack, who is a monster on the edge there, and now he has another monster opposite of him as well. You look at the offensive side of the football. You have Keenan Allen. They re-signed Mike Williams. Austin Eckler, who is, in my opinion, one of the absolute best running backs in the division. Not in the division, in the NFL. Not just the division, in the NFL. He's probably the best running back in this division. It's just hard not to like what the Chargers have going into this. And for them to have played so well under Brandon Staley year one, I feel like they can only go up from here. Same system. Everyone's running it back. You just plug in a few really, really good players, proven players at that, into the team's defense. And this team's looking scary. And I had a hard time putting them at number 3. I will say that. I was very, very stuck when it came to kind of deciding the top 3 teams here and the order I wanted to put them in. I really like the Chargers, and if I was wrong about a team in this division, it would probably be the Chargers here. I could see them swooping into the number 2 spot. I could even see them maybe, all the way up at the top of the number 1 spot. If there was a team I was wrong about, it would probably be the Chargers. Coming in at the number 2 spot, and again, a lot of consideration for everyone in this top 3 here. Who is going to go where? I'm going to go with the Denver Broncos. I almost put them above the Chiefs because the loss of Tyreek Hill for them was really, really big for me, but they did a good job replacing guys there, and we'll get to that in a second. But the Denver Broncos, man, the reason I have them at the number 2 spot and not at the number 3 behind the Chargers is because this team really felt like they were just good quarterback play away from being a legitimate contender, and I love the aggressiveness of Denver to go after and get a guy like Russell Wilson, who's a proven vet in the league, and you get a quarterback who is going to now have wide receivers like Jerry Jeudy that everyone's really hoping now has a real breakout year with Russell Wilson throwing him the football, Tim Patrick, who's been steady for them, Cortland Sutton, who's been impressive as well. You have so much talent at the wide receiver spot, a 2-headed monster in Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams at the running back spot as well. And then again, the championship level defense. They bring in Randy Gregory and DJ Jones, the 2 guys that they brought in, the massive pieces on defense. And, they really didn't lose too much on the defensive side in terms of free agency. I know they lost Kyle Fuller, they lost Bryce Callahan, but they've been able to do such a good job building such a formidable defense. And this was like a top 3 defense last year, and they had no offense to back them up. And typically when your offense plays so poorly and, they're running through 3 and outs and your defense is on the field more often than not, you can see it takes a toll on the defensive side of the ball, but not this team. They shut down some of the better offenses in the league last year, and now you have an offense being led by Russell Wilson that's a Super Bowl champion. I know it's easy to read the news clippings and it's easy to get excited about a team, and I'm sure that, maybe Denver doesn't perform quite as well as a lot of people are expecting, but I do think that they're a contender for the Super Bowl at this point here. The defense was that good last year, and you bring in a guy like Russell Wilson. Hopefully they can mold an offense around him that's effective and efficient. I understand the whole let Russ cook thing that kind of went haywire in Seattle. I think a very balanced attack, something similar to what Russell Wilson was using back when they won their first Super Bowl in Seattle with him a handful of years ago. If they can build something similar to that around Russell where, yeah, you can let him do his thing throwing the football, but you also focus on the ground game and the running attack that you have built there, as long as your offensive line can hold up. That's probably my biggest question mark for this team. This is a contender right here, and a team that could very well end up winning this division because the team at number 1 here, the Kansas City Chiefs, could potentially take a step back. Now, biggest reason I'd say that, but it's just the loss of Tyreek Hill. We're going to find out just how important Tyreek Hill was to this offense and was to Patrick Mahomes as a whole, you obviously still have Travis Kelce, and they did a good job trying to mitigate the loss of Tyreek Hill as well. They brought in wide receiver Marquez Valdez-Scantling. They also brought in Juju Smith-Schuster, so you now have a fairly loaded receiver room with some pretty, talented guys, and we'll see how they fit in and mold into this Chiefs system. But other than that, there's really not much to not like. Tyrann Mathieu on the defensive side of the ball was a big loss. Travarius Ward as well, and Melvin Ingram, all key players to the defense. But when you look at what they did in the draft, you bring in wide receiver Sky Moore on the offensive side of the ball. But the remaining draft picks, it felt so defensive heavy, but for good reason. You bring in cornerback Trent McDuffie. That essentially mitigates the loss of Travarius Ward. You look at edge rusher George Karlaftis. That is a massive one to kind of help replace Melvin Ingram there because he was an outside backer who would rush the ball. So George Karlaftis comes in here. He was a stud while he was there at I want to say Purdue, but I feel like that's wrong. I can't remember where he's from. But edge rusher George Karlaftis. You also look at safety Brian Cook as well. While I'm not saying he's Tyrann Mathieu, you do go ahead and get a guy there who could potentially plug into that role. Linebacker Leo Chenal. Like, there's just so much from their draft class. By far my favorite of the 4 teams in this division here, coupled with, again, some good free agent signings. It felt like they just kind of reloaded and got set and ready to go again. I have a hard time arguing them anywhere but the number 1 spot, and this will definitely be on paper, this is the best team here type deal. We just need to see the product on the field and see the product look as good as it does on paper. I think as far as question marks go for this team, how much do they miss Tyrann Mathieu? How much do they miss Tyreek Hill? Because Tyrann Mathieu, you can say what you want about how good he is still at this point in his stage in his career. I still think he's a top safety in the league. If he's not the best, he's probably within the top 5, arguably. He was a leader, a guy that you want to have in your locker room, which is funny because I remember him coming out of college and people being worried about his maturity, and just the player that he turned into at this stage in his career is just beyond impressive. And so losing a guy like him is tough. And then again, Tyreek Hill, a monster and a playmaker on the offensive side of the ball. But the defense is getting a solid infusion of young talent. You bring in some younger wide receivers who have flashed and shown skills that you could really use and ultimately work in your favor. I think that a wide receiver group where you're starting Marquez Valdez-Scantling, Juju Smith-Schuster, and whoever else you want to plug in along those guys. Travis Kelce's there, obviously still catching passes. I'm honestly pretty excited to see how this works out for the Chiefs. I don't really see this failing. I'm very impressed with what they've had there in terms of just talent-wise and what they've been able to do since Patrick Mahomes got there. Andy Reid is obviously a fantastic coach and has been able to build a crazy offensive system over there. And while Tyreek Hill was huge, you take away Tyreek Hill, but you bring in 2 guys who I think have some talent. It kind of opens things up a little bit more. Yeah, you lose like the one true number 1 wide receiver guy, but you have a Juju Smith-Schuster who was kind of like a 1B, and Marquez Valdez-Scantling, he flashed and has shown some serious talent. I'm not too worried about the Chiefs, so I like them at the number 1 spot. But that is my power rankings for the AFC West. I appreciate you guys for watching again. Make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, and let me know what you guys think of this division and where everyone ranks. I would love to hear your guys' opinions. I appreciate you all for watching. Enjoy the rest of your Thursday. Have a good one.